The restaurant was always loud. Plates clattered, orders were shouted, laughter rose and fell like waves crashing against the walls. Waiters rushed past in a blur of motion, balancing trays and tempers while customers filled the space with noise that never quite settled. It was the kind of place where people came to be seen, to talk, to exist loudly. And yet, in the very back, where the light flickered just a little too often and the air smelled of soap and steam, stood a man no one ever noticed. His name was Ethan Cole. No one called him that. To the staff, he was just dish guy. To the manager, he was a pair of hands that showed up on time and never complained. To the customers, he didn't exist at all. They dropped their plates on the counter without a glance, already turning away before the sound of porcelain hitting. Metal had finished echoing. Ethan never said anything about it. He simply nodded, reached forward, and got to work. His hands moved with quiet precision, almost mechanical in their rhythm. Scrape, rinse, scrub, stack. Every motion was efficient, deliberate, like he had done this not just for months, but for years. There was no wasted movement, no hesitation. Even in the chaos of a dinner rush, when dishes piled high and tempers flared, Ethan remained steady, unshaken. Watching him closely, if anyone ever did, you might notice small things that didn't quite fit. The way he stood, for one. His posture was too straight, too balanced, like someone trained to carry weight far heavier than a stack of plates. Even when he leaned forward into the sink, there was control in it, discipline in the way his shoulders held firm, or his eyes. They were always moving, quietly scanning the room beyond the kitchen doors. Not in curiosity, but in awareness. He noticed everything. The waiter who was about to drop a glass before it slipped. The argument building between a couple before voices rose. The exact moment the manager's mood shifted from irritation to anger. Ethan saw it all. And yet, no one saw him. There were scars, too. Faint, almost hidden beneath the constant dampness of his skin. A thin line along his forearm. Another just above his collar, barely visible when his shirt shifted. They weren't the kind of marks you got from a kitchen accident. They were older, deeper. But no one asked, because no one looked long enough to notice. When his shift ended, Ethan didn't linger. He removed his apron, folded it neatly, always neatly, and placed it exactly where it belonged. No one thanked him. No one said goodbye. He stepped out into the night like a shadow slipping between moments. His apartment wasn't far. A small dim place above a closed shop where the walls felt too thin and the silence too loud. There was little inside, just a bed, a chair, and a table that held nothing but a single glass of water. No photos, no decorations, no signs of a life lived. Ethan sat down slowly, as if even that required thought. For a moment, he just stared ahead, his expression unreadable. Then his eyes drifted, almost instinctively, to the corner of the room, as if expecting something to move. Nothing did. But still, he watched. Minutes passed like that. Then, quietly, he exhaled. It wasn't relief. It was something heavier, something that had been sitting inside him for a long time, pressing against his ribs, refusing to leave. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it came in fragments, restless, uneasy. His body would tense without warning, his hands clenching as if remembering something his mind refused to fully show him. A flicker of sound, a shadow of motion. Then darkness again. Morning always came too soon. And when it did, Ethan Cole returned to the same place, to the same sink, to the same invisible existence. Day after day, night after night. A man surrounded by noise, yet buried in silence. A man seen by no one. A man who, perhaps, had once been something more, but now lived as if that part of him had been erased, or hidden, waiting. The next evening, the restaurant was even louder than usual. It was the kind of chaos that pressed in from all sides. Orders shouted over one another, chairs scraping against the floor, glasses clinking like a constant, restless rhythm. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the noise itself had weight. Ethan Cole stood in his usual place, sleeves damp, hands moving through another endless stack of dishes. The rhythm was the same. It never changed. Scrape, rinse, scrub, stack. But tonight something felt off. Not wrong, just different. It started as a small shift in the air, subtle enough that no one else would notice. A slight pause in the noise near the entrance, a ripple in the crowd as a few heads turned. Not in excitement, not in recognition. Exactly, just curiosity, like something unfamiliar had entered a space that thrived on routine. Ethan didn't look up immediately. He rarely did. But his awareness sharpened. His shoulders straightened ever so slightly, the movement almost invisible beneath his steady work. His eyes flicked once, just once, toward the narrow opening that led to the dining area. And that's when he saw him. Keanu Reeves stepped inside quietly, almost as if he didn't want to disturb the noise around him. There was nothing dramatic about his entrance, no announcement, no demand for attention. Just a calm presence that seemed to carry its own kind of stillness. Most people didn't recognize him right away. A few did, whispering softly, nudging each other. But the moment passed quickly. The restaurant swallowed him like it swallowed everyone else. He took a seat alone. Ethan's gaze lingered for half a second longer than usual. Then he looked away. Back to the dishes, scrape, rinse, scrub, stack. But something had shifted. Time moved, orders came and went, and the restaurant carried on as it always did. Plates piled up faster now, the dinner rush in full force. A waiter hurried in, dropping a stack of dishes onto the counter without breaking stride. "Need these done fast," he muttered, already gone before the word settled. Ethan didn't respond. He never did. He just worked. Minutes later, the same waiter returned, collecting clean plates in a rush. "Table 7, he said absently, grabbing what he needed and disappearing again. Table 7. Ethan didn't know why that detail stayed with him. He didn't usually keep track. But his eyes moved again, just briefly, toward the dining area. Table 7. It was him. The man who had walked in quietly, the one who didn't seem to belong to the noise. Ethan watched for a fraction longer this time, not staring. Never staring. Just observing. The man sat calmly, hands resting loosely on the table, his gaze steady but distant, as if he were seeing more than what was in front of him. There was something familiar in that stillness. Something Ethan couldn't quite place, but felt. A shared silence, maybe. Then the moment broke. Another stack of dishes slammed onto the counter, snapping Ethan back into motion. Scrape, rinse, scrub, stack. The rhythm returned. The noise returned. Everything went back to the way it was supposed to be, until it didn't. It happened quickly. So quickly that most people didn't notice. A plate slipped. A server, moving too fast, lost his grip just as he passed near the kitchen entrance. The dish tilted, spun, about to shatter against the floor. Ethan moved before it fell. His hand shot out, catching it midair with a precision that felt almost unnatural. No hesitation, no fumbling, just instinct. The server blinked, startled. "Oh, thanks," he said, already turning away, already forgetting. But someone had seen. From table 7, Keanu Reeves had been watching. Not the plate. Ethan. The way he moved, the speed, the control, the quiet certainty in that single motion. It wasn't normal. Not for a dishwashing man. Ethan didn't notice the gaze at first. He placed the plate down carefully, as if nothing had happened, and returned to his work. His expression didn't change. His hands didn't slow. But something In him tightened. That same feeling again. Different. For the first time in a long while, Ethan looked up, and their eyes met. It lasted less than a second. But it was enough. There was no confusion in the man's gaze, no dismissal, no looking past him like everyone else did. He was looking at him. Really looking. Ethan's breath caught, just slightly. Then he looked. Away. Back to the sink. Back to the noise. Back to being unseen. But the feeling didn't leave. Because somewhere in the crowded restaurant, among all the voices and movement and chaos, someone had finally noticed. That night, the noise of the restaurant didn't fade the way it usually did. Even after the last plate had been washed, after the final chair had been flipped onto tables and the lights dimmed one by one, something lingered, not in the air, but in Ethan Cole's mind. It was a look, a single quiet look that refused to leave him. He moved through the closing routine the same way he always did, precise, silent, unnoticed. His apron came off, folded with care. The sink was wiped down until it reflected the faint overhead light. Every plate stacked, every surface cleared, no mistakes, no trace. But his thoughts were louder than usual. He could still feel it, that moment. The way Keanu Reeves had looked at him, not through him, not past him, but at him. As if he had seen something beneath the surface, something Ethan had spent years making sure no one ever noticed. It didn't make sense. People didn't look twice at him. They never did. That was the point. Ethan stepped out into the night, the cool air brushing against his face. The streets were quieter here, the chaos of the restaurant replaced by distant traffic and the occasional echo of footsteps. He preferred it this way. Silence was easier, predictable. But tonight, even the silence felt unsettled. He walked with the same measured pace, his eyes scanning without thinking. Corners, shadows, reflections in darkened windows. It was automatic. Something his body did without permission, without effort. Awareness. Always awareness. When he reached his apartment, he paused at the door, just for a second. His gaze shifted slightly, catching the faintest movement at the edge of his vision. A curtain in a nearby window swaying too slowly for the still air. His body stiffened, instincts rising like a quiet alarm. Then nothing. No sound. No movement. Just stillness. Ethan unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room greeted him the same way it always did. Empty, quiet, untouched. The single chair. The bare table. The bed in the corner that looked more like a place to rest than a place to sleep. He closed the door carefully behind him, locked it, checked it once, then again. Only then did he let his shoulders drop, just slightly. He moved toward the sink, filling, a glass with water, his reflection catching faintly in the small mirror above it. For a moment, he froze. He didn't like looking at himself, not because of what he saw, but because of what he remembered. His eyes traced the faint scar along his collar, the one that never quite faded. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled slightly against the edge of the counter. Then, a sound, sharp, sudden. Ethan turned instantly, his body already reacting before his mind caught up. His gaze locked onto the door, his stance shifting, weight balanced, ready. But there was nothing, just the faint echo of something falling in the hallway outside. A neighbor, maybe, or nothing at all. Slowly, his posture eased, but not completely. It never completely did. He set the glass down untouched. Sleep came later, and when it did, it wasn't kind. It never was. Darkness wrapped around him, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with fragments, flashes of something broken and unfinished, a distant shout, the crack of something too loud to ignore, the weight of breath that wasn't his own. Cole, move. The voice echoed, sharp and urgent. Ethan's body tensed in the bed, his hands clenching into fists as if holding onto something invisible. His breathing quickened, uneven. Another flash. Light. Then smoke. Then silence that felt heavier than sound. He woke abruptly, gasping. The room was dark but familiar. The same walls. The same stillness. No danger, no voices. Just the quiet hum of the world outside. Ethan sat up slowly, running a hand across his face. His fingers trembled, just slightly, but he stilled them quickly, forcing control back into his body. Control was everything. Without it, things fell apart. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and sat there for a long moment, staring into nothing. His breathing steadied. His posture straightened. Piece by piece, he put himself back together. By morning, there would be no sign of it. No trace of the man who had jolted awake in the dark. No hint of the past that still clawed its way into his present. He would return to the restaurant, to the sink, to the noise, to being invisible. But something had changed. Not in the world around him. In him. Because for the first time in years, someone had looked at Ethan Cole and seen more than just a dishwashing man. And whether he wanted it or not, that look had followed him home. The next evening, Ethan arrived earlier than usual. Not because he needed to, but because staying in that silent room had begun to feel heavier than the noise of the restaurant. At least there, the chaos gave him something to focus on. Something to drown out the thoughts that had started to press in. He stepped inside, the familiar rush of sound wrapping around him instantly. Orders being shouted, cutlery clinking, laughter echoing too loudly. It was the same as always. Good. Predictable. He moved straight to the back, tying his apron with practiced precision. His hands paused for just a fraction of a second before tightening the knot. Control. Always control. The first few hours passed, like any other. Plates came in, stacked high, smeared with leftovers no one thought twice about. Ethan worked through them methodically, his movements steady, efficient. But his awareness wasn't where it usually was. It kept drifting. Toward the dining area, toward table 7. He didn't know why, and that alone bothered him. Then, just as the dinner rush began to swell, he felt it, that same shift in the air. Subtle, almost invisible, but unmistakable. Ethan didn't look up right away. He didn't need to. Some part of him already knew. Still, his eyes flicked. Up, almost against his will. And there he was again. Keanu Reeves. This time, there was no hesitation in the room. A few more people recognized him now, their voices lowering into whispers, their glances lingering a little longer. But he carried himself the same way. Quiet, unbothered, as if attention meant nothing to him. He took a seat. Not at table 7. Closer. Ethan's grip tightened slightly around the plate in his hands. Closer to the kitchen. Closer to him. The noise continued. Orders were called. Waiters rushed past, but Ethan felt something settle beneath it all. A quiet tension, like a thread being pulled tighter with each passing second. Minutes later, a server approached the sink with a small stack of dishes. "Careful with these," he muttered, setting them down. Ethan barely heard him. Because behind the server, a voice spoke. Calm, low, unmistakably steady. "Hey. Excuse me." Ethan froze. Not visibly. Not in a way anyone else would notice. But inside, something locked into place. The server turned. "Yeah? I think you dropped this." There was a brief pause, then the soft sound of something being placed on the counter. The server glanced down. "Oh, thanks, man," he said quickly, grabbing it without much thought. But Ethan had already seen it. A small utensil, perfectly clean. Placed carefully, not just returned. deliberate. Ethan's eyes lifted slowly. And there he was, closer now. Close enough that the noise of the restaurant didn't seem to reach him in the same way. His presence felt different up close. Not loud, not demanding, just aware. Keanu Reeves looked past the server, not at the kitchen, at Ethan, again. That same look, not curiosity alone, recognition. Ethan forced his gaze back down, his hands, moving again, faster now. Scrape, rinse, scrub, stack, but the rhythm was off, just slightly. Busy night? The voice came again. Ethan didn't respond. He wasn't supposed to. The server chuckled awkwardly. Yeah, it's always like this, he answered instead, assuming the question was meant for him. But it wasn't. There was a pause, then footsteps, not leaving, approaching. Ethan felt it before he saw it, the shift in presence, the closeness. His body reacted instinctively, his shoulders tightening, his awareness sharpening to a point. Hey! The voice was right there now, closer than anyone ever got. Ethan turned before he could stop himself. For the first time, there was no distance between them. No crowd, no blur of motion, just two men standing in a narrow space filled with steam and noise that suddenly felt far away. Keanu Reeves gave a small, almost apologetic smile. Thanks for catching that plate yesterday, he said simply. Ethan blinked. Of all the things he expected, that wasn't one of them. No, one remembered things like that. No one came back for something so small. It's nothing, Ethan replied, his voice low, rough from disuse. It was the first time anyone in the restaurant had heard him speak in days, maybe longer. Keanu studied him, not intensely, not intrusively, but enough to notice. It didn't look like nothing, he said quietly. Ethan's jaw tightened. There it was again. That edge, that feeling of being seen. He looked away first, reaching for another plate, forcing his hands back into motion. I just got lucky, he muttered. A lie. They both knew it. Keanu didn't didn't challenge it. He just nodded slightly, as if accepting the answer, while clearly not believing it. Still, he said, stepping back just a little, giving space without breaking the moment. Not everyone moves like that. Ethan's hands stilled for half a second, then continued. Scrape, rinse, scrub, stack. The rhythm returned. But something had shifted. Again. See you around, Keanu added, his tone easy, as if the conversation had been nothing more than casual. As if it hadn't mattered. Then he turned and walked back into the noise. Back to the crowd. Back to being just another customer. Ethan stood there, staring at the sink. At the water running endlessly over his hands. His reflection flickered faintly in the metal surface, distorted, unclear. For a long moment, he didn't move. Because no one had ever done that before. No one had ever come back. No one had ever noticed enough to remember. And now, someone had, not just noticed, but stepped closer. Ethan exhaled slowly, his grip tightening around the edge of the sink. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had built his life around being invisible, around not being seen. And yet, that man kept looking at him like there was something worth finding, something worth understanding. Ethan didn't know if that was a good thing, but for the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure he could ignore it, part. The next few days didn't return to normal. Ethan tried to force them to. He showed up at the same time, tied his apron the same way, stood at the same sink with the same quiet discipline. His hands moved in their familiar rhythm, his posture steady, his expression blank. From the outside, nothing had changed, but inside, something wouldn't settle. It was a small thing, really. Just a few words, a glance, a moment that should have passed like everything else in that restaurant. People came and went all the time, faces blurred together, Voices faded. That's how it was supposed to work. But this one didn't fade, because Keanu Reeves kept coming back, not every day. Just enough. Enough to turn coincidence into intention. And each time he sat a little closer, never intrusive, never forcing anything, just present, watching, without making it obvious. Ethan noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. The way Keanu never rushed his meals. The way he observed the room like he was listening to something deeper than the noise. The way his eyes always, eventually, found their way back. To the kitchen. Back to him. It should have made Ethan pull further away, disappear more completely. But it didn't. That was the problem. One evening, during a slower hour between the rushes, Ethan stepped away from the sink for the first time, in what felt like hours. His hands were raw from the water, the faint sting grounding him in something real. He moved toward the small row of lockers against the back wall. His locker. It was plain, unmarked, like everything else about him. He opened it carefully. Inside, there was almost nothing. A folded jacket, a worn-out pair of gloves, and tucked into the corner, a photograph. Ethan hesitated before picking it up. His fingers hovered over it for a moment, like touching it might pull him somewhere he didn't want to go. But he took it anyway. The edges were worn, slightly bent from being handled too many times, or maybe not enough. The image was faded but still clear. A man stood in the center, younger, cleaner, stronger, wearing a uniform. Ethan. But not the Ethan anyone here would recognize. His posture in the photo was different, commanding, certain. There was something in his eyes that didn't exist anymore. Something steady, unbroken. Beside him were others. Faces blurred now with time, but once familiar. A team, a unit, a life. Ethan's grip tightened slightly. For a moment, the noise of the restaurant faded. The clatter of dishes, the distant voices, it all pulled away, leaving only the weight of memory pressing in. A voice echoed faintly in his mind, sharp, urgent. "Cole, we don't have time. Move!" His breath caught. He blinked, and the image snapped back into focus. Just a photo. Just the past. Gone. Or at least, it was supposed to be. "Didn't know you took breaks." The voice came from behind him. Calm. Familiar. Ethan froze. Slowly, he lowered the photo, his body already reacting before his mind caught up. His shoulders tightened, instincts rising, every sense sharpening at once. He turned. Keanu Reeves stood a few steps away, not close enough to invade his space, but close enough to see. Ethan's eyes flicked just for a second toward the photo still in his hand, too late to hide it completely. Keanu's gaze followed the movement, not aggressively, not prying, but observant, noticing, always noticing. "Sorry," Keanu added, quickly, raising a hand slightly. "Didn't mean to interrupt." Ethan said nothing. His grip on the photo tightened just enough to crease the edge. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Keanu spoke again, softer this time. "That's you, isn't it?" It wasn't really a question. Ethan's jaw clenched. He could have denied it. Could have shrugged it off, laughed it away, shut the moment down like he always did. That would have been easier. Safer. Instead, he said nothing. And somehow, that silence said more than words ever could. Keanu didn't push, didn't step closer. He just nodded slightly, as if acknowledging something important without needing it explained. "You don't look like someone who's always been here," he said quietly. Ethan let out a slow breath, his eyes dropping to the photo again. For a second, something flickered across his face. Not fear, not anger. Something deeper. Loss. I haven't, he said finally. The words felt heavy, like they hadn't been used in a long time. Keanu studied him, not with curiosity alone, now, but with understanding that seemed to grow with every moment. What happened? He asked. Simple. Direct. Ethan's expression hardened instantly. The walls went back up. Fast. Nothing, he replied too quickly, too flat. A lie that didn't even try to sound real. Keanu held his gaze for a moment longer. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right, he said. No pressure, no challenge, just acceptance, on the surface at least. He stepped back, giving Ethan space again, but the air between them had changed. Because now it wasn't just a feeling anymore, it wasn't just a glance or a moment. There was proof. A crack in the story Ethan had built around himself. A glimpse of something hidden, something real. Ethan placed the photo back into the locker, more carefully this time. He closed the door, the soft click echoing louder than it should have. When he turned back toward the sink, his movements were steady again, controlled. But his mind wasn't. Because now someone else knew. Not everything. Not even close. But enough. Enough to ask questions. Enough to see beyond the surface. And, for the first time in years, Ethan Cole wasn't completely invisible anymore. That night, the air inside the restaurant felt tighter than usual. Not louder, not busier, just heavier. Ethan Cole worked through the stacks of dishes with the same quiet precision, but the rhythm no longer steadied him the way it once did. His hands moved on instinct, but his mind was somewhere else, circling the same moment again and again. The photo. The question. What happened? He had spent years making sure no one ever asked that, and now someone had. Worse, someone had seen enough to know the answer wasn't simple. Ethan rinsed another plate, the water running over his hands as his jaw tightened slightly. He didn't like this feeling. The sense of something slipping, of control loosening in ways he couldn't predict. Control kept things buried. Control kept him safe. Hey. The voice came again. Calm. Familiar. Too close. Ethan didn't turn this time. He didn't need to. I'm working, he said quietly, his tone firm but not sharp. There was a pause behind him. Then, I can see that. A hint of something lighter. In the voice, almost a smile. Ethan exhaled slowly, setting the plate down with deliberate care before finally turning. Keanu Reeves stood there again, hands relaxed at his sides, posture easy but grounded. There was nothing forced about him. No urgency, no pressure, just presence. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. You shouldn't be back here. Probably not, Keanu admitted. But he didn't leave. For a moment they just stood there, the noise of the restaurant fading into something distant. It was strange how the chaos could feel so far away when everything inside Ethan was suddenly so focused. You left something unfinished, Keanu said gently. Ethan's expression hardened. No, I didn't. Keanu tilted his head slightly, studying him. You said nothing happened, he replied. But people don't end up here by accident. Ethan's hands curled slightly at his sides. That was enough. Enough pushing. Drop it, Ethan said, quieter now, but firmer. A warning. Keanu didn't flinch, didn't argue, but he didn't step away either. All right, he said again, the same calm tone. Then don't tell me everything. Ethan's gaze flickered, just for a second. Just tell me why someone like you would choose to disappear. That word hit differently. Disappear. Ethan's breath caught, barely noticeable but real. For a moment, the walls held. Then something cracked. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious, but it was enough. His eyes dropped slightly, his shoulders loosening. In a way they hadn't in a long time. The tension didn't disappear, but it shifted, turning inward instead of outward. "You ever make a choice?" Ethan said slowly, his voice lower now, rougher. "That doesn't leave you with a way back?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He just listened, really listened. Ethan let out a quiet breath, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the room. "It wasn't supposed to go wrong," he continued. "It was just another mission. In, out, clean." His jaw tightened. That's what we were told. The noise of the restaurant blurred completely now. Gone. All that remained was the weight of memory. "There were civilians," Ethan said. "Not supposed to be there. Intel was bad. Everything shifted in seconds." His fingers twitched slightly, like they were remembering something his mind couldn't fully hold. "We had a choice," he went on. "Follow orders, or change the plan." Keanu's voice came quietly. "And you changed it." Ethan nodded once, barely. "I pulled my team out of position," he said. "Broke protocol. Gave the civilians a way out." His expression tightened. "But that left us exposed." A pause. Heavy. "Not everyone made it back." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Keanu didn't interrupt, didn't soften it. He just stayed there. Ethan swallowed, his gaze dropping to the floor. "They needed someone to blame," he said. "Someone who broke the chain. Someone who made the call." A bitter edge crept into his voice. "That someone was me." "You saved lives," Keanu said quietly. Ethan let out a hollow breath. "That's not how it was written." Silence stretched between them, not empty, full. "I could have fought it," Ethan admitted. "Could have tried to clear my name." He shook his head slightly. "But that would have dragged everything into the open, things that weren't supposed to be seen." "So you took it," Keanu said. Another nod, slow. "I signed off," Ethan replied. Walked away, no noise, no fight. His voice dropped even further. Just disappeared. The word settled heavily between them. Disappear. Not forced. Chosen. For the first time since the conversation began, Ethan looked up. Really looked at Keanu. There was no judgment in his eyes. No doubt, just understanding, and something else. Respect. "I didn't lose everything," Ethan said quietly. "I gave it up." The truth sat there, raw and unguarded. Keanu held his gaze for a long moment. Then softly he said, "That's not something people forget." Ethan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. A flicker, uncertain, because for years he had lived as if that part of him didn't exist anymore, as if it had been erased, buried, gone. But now, standing in the middle of a noisy kitchen with water running over his hands and a stranger who refused to look away, it didn't feel gone. It felt remembered, and that was far more dangerous. The night stretched on, but the conversation didn't leave Ethan. Even after he returned to the sink, even after the rhythm came back, scrape, rinse, scrub, stack, it all felt distant, like he was moving through something that no longer fully held him in place. Because the past wasn't buried anymore, it had been spoken. And once something like that found its way into the open, it didn't go back quietly. Ethan kept his head down, but his awareness sharpened again. Stronger this time, more alert. Not just out of habit, but because something inside him had shifted, from avoidance to readiness. He should have known it wouldn't end there. Near closing time, the restaurant thinned out. The noise softened into scattered conversations and the occasional clink of glass. Staff moved slower now, exhaustion, replacing urgency, That's when Ethan noticed them. Two men. They didn't belong. It wasn't obvious, not to anyone else. They were dressed normally, sat at a corner table like any other customers. But they weren't eating. Their plates remained untouched, their attention drifting too often, too deliberately. Watching. Ethan's hands slowed, just slightly. His eyes flicked up again, sharper now. The angle of their posture. The way one of them scanned the exits without turning his head. The quiet tension in their shoulders. Not random. Not casual. His jaw tightened. It had been a long time since he'd seen that kind of presence. A long time since it mattered. He turned back to the sink, forcing his movements to stay steady. Scrape, rinse, scrub, stack. But his mind was already working. They weren't here for the food. They were here for someone. And deep down, Ethan already knew who. Something wrong? The voice came quietly beside him. Ethan didn't flinch. This time. Didn't need to. They found me, he said under his breath, barely moving his lips. A pause. Then Keanu Reeves stepped slightly closer, his gaze shifting casually toward the dining area without drawing attention. Who? He asked. Ethan didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked once more toward the men. They don't forget, he said finally. Not people like me. Keanu studied the room more carefully now, his expression still calm, but focused. You think they're here to take you back? He asked. Ethan's grip tightened around the edge of the sink. No, he said quietly. A beat. They're here to make sure I stay gone. The weight of that settled heavily. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt smaller now, tighter, like something was closing in, even if no one else could feel it. Keanu exhaled slowly. Then we don't wait for them to make the first move. Ethan shook his head slightly. You don't understand, he muttered. This isn't something you step into. Keanu's voice didn't change. Too late for that. Ethan looked at him then. Really looked. There was no hesitation in his eyes, no second guessing, just quiet certainty. It didn't make sense. Why? Ethan asked, his voice low but edged now. You don't even know me. Keanu held his gaze. I know enough, he said simply. Something in Ethan shifted at that. Not fear, not doubt. Something deeper. Because for years, no one had chosen to stand next to him once they understood what he carried. No one had stayed. Until now. A chair scraped across the floor. One of the men stood. Ethan saw it in the reflection of the metal sink before he heard it fully. Timing. Distance. Angles. His body reacted before his thoughts finished forming. Stay behind me, Ethan said quietly. Keanu didn't argue. The man approached slowly, his steps controlled, deliberate. His expression was neutral. But his eyes were not. They locked onto Ethan immediately. Recognition. Ethan Cole, the man said, his voice low enough not to draw attention, but sharp enough to cut through everything else. Ethan didn't turn right away. He finished placing the plate in his hand down carefully. Then he faced him. The room seemed to hold its breath. You've got the wrong guy, Ethan replied evenly. The man's lips curved slightly, not a smile, not quite. No, he said. We don't. The second man stood now too, moving closer, closing the distance just enough to make it clear. This wasn't a coincidence. This was planned. You disappeared, the first man continued. Walked away from something that wasn't yours to walk away from. Ethan's expression didn't change, but his stance did. Subtle, balanced, ready. I made my choice, Ethan said. And now, you'll answer for it, The words hung heavy, final. The tension snapped tight. For a split second, everything slowed. The noise, the movement, the air itself. Ethan's mind calculated. 2 men. Close range, limited space, civilians everywhere. No room for mistakes. His fingers flexed once at his side. Not fear, preparation. Then, movement, fast, precise. The first man reached inside his jacket. Ethan stepped forward instantly, intercepting the motion before it could fully form. His hand struck the man's wrist, redirecting it with controlled force. The movement was clean, efficient, like it had been practiced 1,000 times. The second man lunged. Ethan pivoted, using the narrow space to his advantage, forcing. The man off balance without creating chaos around them. A chair tipped. A glass shattered somewhere behind them. Voices rose, but confusion, not clarity. No one understood what they were seeing. But Keanu did. He watched, not shocked, not frozen, but focused. Because this was the truth. Not the man at the sink. Not the silence. Not the invisibility. This was who Ethan Cole really was. Every movement told the story. Every reaction confirmed it. Not a failure. Not a man who ran. A man who had been trained, refined, and forced to disappear. Within seconds, it was over. The 2 men staggered back, their control broken, not defeated but forced to retreat without escalating the situation further. Too many witnesses, too many variables. "This isn't finished," one of them said under his breath, straightening his jacket. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. They already knew. The men turned and walked out, disappearing into the night as quietly as they had come. The restaurant erupted into confused noise, people talking, asking questions, trying to piece together what had just happened. But Ethan stood still, breathing steady, controlled. Keanu stepped beside him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, quietly, Keanu said, "You didn't run." Ethan's gaze stayed fixed ahead. "No," he replied. His voice was different now. Not hidden. Not distant. Something closer to what it used to be. Because for the first time in years, Ethan Cole hadn't disappeared. He had stood his ground, and everything was about to change. The restaurant never truly recovered from that night. Even days later, the staff still whispered about it, about the sudden fight, the men who came and left like shadows, the quiet dishwashing man who moved like someone else entirely. Stories twisted, grew exaggerated, faded, and returned again in fragments. But none of them reached the truth, because the truth didn't live in the noise, it lived in what came after. Ethan Cole didn't run. That alone changed everything. He still showed up the next day, same time, same place, tying his apron with the same careful precision. But something about him was different now. Not louder, not more visible in the way others understood. Just present, grounded, like a man who had stopped hiding from his own shadow. The manager barely looked at him, muttering something about keeping things quiet. The staff avoided asking questions they didn't want answers to. To them, it was easier that way, easier to pretend nothing had changed, but one person didn't pretend. Keanu Reeves walked in again that evening. Same calm presence, same quiet awareness. But this time, there was no distance left between what he knew and what he saw. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he moved toward the back, toward the kitchen, toward Ethan. Ethan noticed him immediately. Of course he did. Their eyes met, and this time, neither of them looked away. "You stayed," Keanu said. Ethan's hands rested against the edge of the sink, still but ready. "I told you," he replied quietly. "I'm not running." Keanu nodded once, like he expected that answer. "I made a few calls. he said. Ethan's expression didn't change, but something in his gaze sharpened. I didn't ask you to, he replied. I know. That was it. No apology, no explanation, layered with justification. Just truth. Ethan exhaled slowly, turning back to the sink, though he didn't start working again. It won't matter, he said. People already decided what I am. Keanu stepped a little closer, not invading space, just closing the distance enough to be heard without effort. Not everyone, he said. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. For years, that sentence would have meant nothing. Now, it lingered. There were reports, Keanu continued, his voice steady. Incomplete. Buried, but not gone. He paused briefly. And there were names. Ethan didn't move, but his attention locked onto every word. People. Who made it out, Keanu said. People who remember what actually happened. Silence followed, heavy, uncertain. Ethan finally turned, his eyes searching Keanu's face. Not for doubt, but for something else. Hope. Dangerous. Unfamiliar. You shouldn't have done that, Ethan said. Though his voice had lost some of its edge, Keanu met his gaze evenly. Someone should have. That was the moment everything shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. Because for years, Ethan had carried a version of the truth that no one else acknowledged. A weight that had no witness. A story that had no voice. And now, someone had gone looking for it, not to expose him, but to understand him. Days passed. Then something happened that no one in that restaurant expected. A man walked in, older, slower, but with eyes that carried recognition the second they landed on Ethan. The room didn't notice him, but Ethan did. He froze. Not out of fear. Out of memory, the man stepped closer, his voice quiet but unshaken. I knew I'd find you someday. Ethan's throat tightened. Thought you were gone, the man added, a faint smile breaking through. After everything. Keanu stood nearby, silent now, letting the moment belong to them. Ethan swallowed, his voice rough. I was. The man shook his head. No, he said softly. You just stepped back so the rest of us could live. The words landed harder than anything else. Harder than blame. Harder than silence. Because they were the truth Ethan had buried. The deepest. More people came after that. Not crowds, not media storms, just individuals, one by one. Voices that confirmed what had been hidden, stories that aligned, pieces that finally fit together. The narrative began to shift, not loudly, not publicly at first, but undeniably. Ethan Cole wasn't the man who failed. He was the man who chose others over himself, who took the fall so the truth wouldn't destroy more lives, who disappeared. So others could go home, and slowly. The world began to see it. Not the dishwashing man, not the silence. The truth. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the restaurant settled into its usual rhythm, Ethan stood outside for the first time in a long while. Not hiding, just standing, breathing. Keanu stepped beside him, hands in his pockets, gaze calm as ever. It's different now, Keanu said. Ethan nodded slightly. Yeah, he replied. A pause. Then Keanu glanced at him. What are you going to do? Ethan looked out at the street, at the quiet movement of people who had no idea what had changed, and didn't need to. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, I don't know, he admitted. And for the first time, that didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like possibility. Keanu smiled faintly, not pushing, not guiding, just there. Ethan exhaled, the weight on his shoulders lighter than it had been in years, Not gone, but shared, seen, finally understood. And as the noise of the restaurant carried on behind them, Ethan Cole stood not as a man who had been forgotten, but as someone who had been found, not by the world, not by fame, but by one person who chose to look closer when everyone else looked away. And in doing so, changed everything.